Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Good Grief. My name is Dr. Christine Malone, and in this podcast, we talk about trauma, tragedy, and survival. In each episode, I will interview someone that has gone through grief in some way, and we will discuss the impact it has had on their life. By sharing these stories, we hope that others won't feel alone should they be going through similar situations. Enjoy.
Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. My guests today are Mary Donahue and Alex Armstrong. They are co-authors of the book On Your Own, A Widow's Guide to Emotional and Financial Well-Being. And I'm hoping they will share with us today a bit about their book, what inspired them to write the book, and who it is that would be benefiting from reading this book. So, Mary, if you'd like to go first, introduce yourself, and then Alex, you next.
Okay. All right. So I am Mary Donahue, and when Alex and I first wrote this book, I was the widow, and Alex was the advisor. So my story was that I was married, and we had two children, and my husband suddenly died. Prior to this time, we had jointly selected Alex as a financial planner for us, but that really meant he did the work and tried with regularity to get me involved. And my constantly saying, oh, honey, I know, we really should, but not today because this and this and this and this. And then he suddenly died, and Alex was actually left with me, who was no picnic because I didn't know where we had anything. I couldn't make a decision. I tried to think, well, what would my husband want? What would my father think? Or whatever, or along those lines, until eventually she shaped me up, gave me a little teaching lecture about what's wrong with me. And I have a professional life, and I've managed this and that, so shape up. So that began our connection. And after a while, we actually became friends. And when Alex approached me about her interest in writing a book for widows, because she was dealing with so many of them on the financial side, I thought it was something I would really like to get into as well, because I know what I went through, and I know how I avoided this and that and the other thing. And I really would hope that this book is helpful to people so they don't find themselves in my situation. So that's how we got together to write the book. In the first place.
So, Alex, I'm taking that you must be a financial planner. So tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I am a financial planner, but my mother was widowed when she was 40, and I was when she was 48, and I was 8, and she was left with not too much money. And as I got into the profession of financial planning, I started dealing a lot with widows, and I knew the impact it could have on them, and that if I could do anything to help them so that their life was easier. But that's how I knew it was more because of personal, that I knew it was more than just a financial event. But the thesis of our book, and I'm a certified financial planner, and I've been doing this for over 40 years. In fact, Mary and I have known each other for over 40 years. This book we wrote is the 6th edition, and the first one we wrote was about 40 years ago. And it really, things have changed in some ways, but in other ways it hasn't, because unfortunately people are not as prepared. It's almost like if you don't prepare for it, it won't happen. Well, that doesn't work out that way.
Yeah, true. So for our listeners, because I know you two are the experts here, but what are some of the pitfalls that happen to women? Well, we'll just say people, but widows who suddenly their spouse passes away, and then what are some of the things that happen to them, especially with financial things that you are trying with this book to avoid, to help them
Well,
avoid?
I think the one thing is to know where your assets are, and also hopefully you have an advisor that you've met with and you have a relationship with that you can ask him or her questions of, and then to know where the records are, how much it costs you to live, and to be really involved in the financial process before something happens. And there's a myth out there because you're a career woman, you're more involved. Sometimes if you're a career woman, you're less involved because you have your family, you have your children, you have your social life, and you have your career. And if your spouse says, honey, I'll take care of this, you say, be my guest, one less thing to worry about. So it's not that the woman is not capable of learning. Of course she is. But if it's one thing she could take off her to-do list, she's more than willing to do it. But it's really important that you be involved. You don't have to know all the answers, but you do need to know what questions to ask.
Right. That's a great
You
point,
know,
bringing that up.
also, when you lose somebody, if you don't know how you're going to exist, in some ways it intensifies the grief because you're such a loss to where to go. But certainly in knowing where things are, like, where you're going to find the files or the information that you need to figure out what your situation is. And I think one of the other things, it's easy to say my father, my brother is just going to come in and take this all over. And we have very strong feelings that women have the ability to do this on their own and need to take it on and not just hand it off to somebody who is then going to fulfill either whatever the role was of the husband first and then another relative. So it's really important to know some of these things. My husband was very organized. So for me, the one thing I probably did know is where these files were. What they meant, on the other hand, was another story. And that is where Alex came in, because I just knew we had this, but okay, what does all this mean? So it's a learning experience. And I have the sense, I would say, and for myself, that grieving in some ways is intensified when you don't know how you're going to survive financially, and makes you move to a less functional position.
Yes, absolutely. And that could be for, women of any age, whether you're a young woman with young
Correct.
children or anything. Absolutely, for sure. Yeah.
Well,
our book starts with after the funeral, and it takes you through the first year and then subsequent years, but it takes you step by step, chapter by chapter. Here's how to organize your files. Here's how to put a budget together. Here's how to put a balance sheet together from the financial point of view. But at the same time, we interweave the story of 4 hypothetical widows in different circumstances at different ages. Mary, do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, and one of the things that makes this book readable is that we've created 4 hypothetical women, ranging in age 40, 50, 60, 70, and those women represent what a woman in that decade is likely to be facing following a loss. And you can read the stories through if you so choose. You can read a given chapter, but it makes it much easier for women to understand the finances when they are attached to one of these hypothetical characters, which has been reinforced for us by the many, many people that have read it and have told us, oh, this was really interesting. I wanted to know what happened to this hypothetical person, so I just read it through. So we know that works.
It's sort of like reading a novel. So rather than being, quote unquote, a boring how-to book, you're following people as they go through the different, and you want to know what happens to this person. And sometimes the person will identify with one or other of the characters. Or composite. It might be, well, I'm a little of Dorothy and I'm a little one of this, and then we take them through the 10th year. So you find out, the closing chapter is what happened to them 10 years out the road. So, it's not one of these books that leaves you hanging. You wonder what happened.
Whatever happened to so-and-so? Yeah, no, that's great.
Exactly.
That's great. Are those true stories, or are they just
hypotheticals? They're hypotheticals that we've put together, that are really in microcosm what you would expect at this in the decade. So like the 40-year-old is left with sudden loss, has children, she's been overprotected her whole life, first her dad, then her husband. So she's a total basket case, and so it goes. And the 70-year-old is always been taken care of by her husband, has no children. So we have created these stories so that people, the reader here, can identify depending on what they're personally experiencing at the time.
No, I think that's great. I think that's great. So I know before we started recording, we talked about kind of other audience people who might be beneficial, that might benefit from your book. So talk a little bit about that, not just the widow, if you will, but who else could be benefiting from this book?
Well, we have found and been told, by the way, that people, women, let's just say start with the widows, that they have given the book to their daughters or to a sister. A same thing with men. There have been men that have written this book that thought, "Hey, I really want my wife to read this because I think it would be helpful to her," or somebody referred it to him. So it has a wider audience here that we feel is important. And it is not depressing. I mean, this is not a book that is really something that is going to make you feel worse, because one of our theses throughout it is that as you are a woman here, but you have the capacity to deal with this. It's going to take time, but you're going to get there. You just have to keep on going.
Yeah. You'd also
And
mentioned like
actually,
women,
I'm
you'd also
sorry.
mentioned like women who've gone through a divorce. So how would that be helpful to someone in that position as well?
Well,
Well,
again,
and
if
the
you think about the finances ahead of time, that'll help you because, as we all know, not all divorces are pleasant, and and sometimes I won't say all, but some husbands hide assets, etc. So if you've been involved on the financial end from the get-go, this is less apt to happen. I remember I had a client came in who was actually a secretary of a government agency. And by secretary, I don't mean the typing secretary, I mean secretary of, and had a cabinet position. And she had delegated the finances to her husband. And they got a divorce. And she found out, to her chagrin, that he hadn't done a terribly good job of managing the money, and which really annoyed her because she knew she could have taken control and hadn't. So again, if you are involved in the finances from the beginning and are involved, it will help you.
Yeah. Well,
so
knowledge is power,
I'm
that's for sure.
I want to add to that because I'm the psychologist here, and I've been in a private practice dealing with the many divorce situations. So there's a key difference, though, between a widow and a divorcee, which is the divorcee is usually still living with this other person. And that person is still in their lives, whether they want it to deal with it or not. And that is one of the key differences, because when we talked about writing the book, we really were thinking initially maybe it could be focused on both divorce and widowhood. But the reality of that is divorce is very complicated in other ways. It's loss, but it's somewhat of a different loss, so it's tricky. That's all I want to say. But certainly any divorcee can benefit from reading the book because they will learn a great deal about what they need to know moving forward in their own situations.
And
Great.
we make the point that not all widows are the same. You might be old, you might be young. Or one of the issues is how the person died, the spouse died.
Mm,
If it's a sudden death, it's a different reaction than if it's a lingering illness. With a lingering illness, there's even what we call anticipatory grief, where you sort of been preparing for it. And in my case, my husband had been sick for many years, and it was a gradual deterioration. You knew it was going to happen, you just didn't know when. Whereas if your husband has a sudden heart attack and dies 3 weeks later, it's totally different in terms of how you deal with it and how you can prepare yourself for it.
right. It's a great point. That's a great point. So tell me a little bit about, I'm guessing you've heard from people who've read your book and how it's helped them. So do you have any kind of uh, scenarios you'd like to share about somebody's told you a story about how it helped them?
Well, there are many, but we
Sure.
particularly like the one is "Don't send flowers and buy this book,"
Ah,
uh, which we like, which we've heard, and it really we've gotten a lot of positive input as to how much the book has helped someone as they move through this, because it's a book that you can read. It's not talking down to you. It's not just a how-to book. It's acknowledging that you're going through a good bit of emotional turmoil. And at the same time, you have to cope. In my situation, I had 2 young children when this happened, and I was working as well. So there was just a lot to cover. And many people have acknowledged, based on their own circumstances, how helpful it was to have the opportunity to see the book, because you can also go back to to a given chapter, depending on where you are. So as far as, I would say, we've gotten really enormous support from, or recognition from, people who've read the book as to how helpful it has been to them.
Right. Okay. Well, oops, just lost Alex. So, let me just ask you, is there anything else you would like to add, Mary, about the book or your experience or advice you might give to listeners?
Well, I really would. I mean, it's just personal as well as from my professional life. It is, when something catastrophic happens, you're sort of just stunned, and you just don't know where you're at. You have to stay the course, and you have to recognize that, with knowledge and information, things will get better. Because the worst situation, as you will know, is to be in limbo,
Yeah.
where you don't know what is going to happen one way or the other. You're stuck. You don't know. It's going to be this, it's going to be that. What do I have to do? Where do I start? Take it in compartments, in small pieces. You don't have to solve all of this in a day. The theses, I'm sure you've heard before us, is don't make a major decision in the first year
Right.
of your widowhood. Give yourself some time.
Right.
Don't feel, people are going to ask you for money. Don't feel you have to, give to your son or some friend or whatever who wants to start a business. Try to steady yourself, get grounded and yourself, because that's the only way you're going to be able to help these other people.
Yeah.
And yourself to move on. Because, with me, it was like, oh, I have all these things. I have these 2 young children, 18 different kinds of activities that they had, a house to run, a job here. And my husband and I, by the way, this is in my personal situation, is important. At the point that he just suddenly died, we had worked out that he had the major income throughout the years, but we were going to swap because I was younger. So we had planned, I would pick up more work, he would take on less. So I wasn't working full time. Now came a crash course after he died in needing income.
Yeah.
So it depends on your circumstances. There's so many different things that individuals have, but we feel the book covers most of it, I would say. For people, I mean, it's the specific examples, like we have lots of sheets on Alex has how to get organized, and and how to apply them, and how you start, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and I also want to make sure I point out, because in the title you say emotional and financial well-being. So obviously financial well-being, we all have to have that. Otherwise, how are we going to keep on living and take care of ourselves and our children or whatever we have left? And obviously I can see how that ties into emotional well-being. But can you say anything else about kind of the emotional well-being part of what's in your book?
Yes, I'm happy to, because for years we had the Kubler-Ross theory of phases of grief, and another one of tasks of mourning. But in recent years, particularly coming out of Australia, actually, there's been a lot of work recognizing that grief is not this routine, that it's not linear. And as Alex indicated before, one of the things that's key is, have you lost somebody as the result of a long terminal illness versus sudden loss or multiple loss at the same time? Because the grief process is entirely different for these people. And that's legitimate. So nobody, I think this is another important piece I would say here. Grief is individual. It is not a lockstep course that somebody goes through. And it may take you a year, it may take you 2 years. It doesn't matter. It's your journey.
Yes.
You need to take the journey in your own time, and not let anybody make you feel you must be doing this and this and this now. Why are you not? So on and so forth. So that is key here. And we can't really stress that enough either.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. I was widowed at the age of 30 when my husband took his own life, and we had a 2 and a 4-year-old at the time. And though financial things, I didn't have I mean, I was mostly in charge of that myself, but he owned his own business and I had to maneuver my way through, closing out his business and all that kind of stuff that I really wish I'd been better prepared to do and know what to do. And at the same time dealing with, all little kids and just, everything else under the sun that comes about. And one thing that I would also like to point out, and I'm sure you hit on this too, is self-care. I know in my case, I was so focused on taking care of my kids and everything else that I didn't really think about how I was dealing with things, and that was not good for me health wise. So I think that's also kind of part of it too, especially for those women who have so much you have to take care of, to remember that you have to take care of yourself as well.
Yeah, but that was my bucket too, because my daughters were 10 and 15 when my husband suddenly died.
Yeah.
And so it's there, but I found that what happens is the focus is on the children and whatever else you need to do, and you put yourself on a back burner and you probably pay for it down the road.
Yes. Yes. True.
Someplace.
True.
But you deal with what's in front of you
Yeah.
on the primary level, I would say here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I do think all of that is true. But we do feel, I think it should be stressed that many people benefit from the book. And maybe it is, but we primarily did it for widows at the time, both my personal thing and the fact that Alex wanted to be able to give her clients something to take home.
Right.
So that they were not just hearing this from her, say at a meeting in her office, but would be able then to go back home and relook at this, and maybe with somebody else that would help them get more organized.
Right. No, that's
All
great.
that I say is
That's
true.
great. Well, Alex, is there anything else you would like to add before
Is she
we end
here?
today? Yes, she's back.
Yes, I am. Can you
Okay.
hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, but you disappeared now. This time it's you that disappeared. Last time it was me.
Yes. Well, as you could tell from Mary, we can tell each other's story quite well.
Right.
We've done it so many times. So I'm sorry I missed the last 10 minutes, but I don't know what happened with my computer. It just went blank. But anyway, I got it back on the phone. So I don't know if there's anything else I could add because I don't know what else has been said. So
no, I
you
think
can take that. But
yeah,
other than we just hope we've gotten such good reaction from people that we do hope a lot of people do read it. It is only a $20 investment on Amazon, and it's well worth it from the point of view that it can get you ready for the future, and it can be a big comfort to somebody who is dealing with the loss. And I think the big thing, and Mary probably touched on this, is that the widow feels out of control. In other words, she didn't control her spouse's death. He is dead, and now she has to go ahead and make some decisions that she's always made jointly or made. And even if it was she was the person who paid the bill, she didn't necessarily wasn't involved with the investment. So it's going to take time to get used to the transition. But as the theme of our book is, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we hope your book helps you reach that stage of well-being.
Well, we will have a link to where listeners can find your book when we have the podcast air. The podcast notes will include that so people can find it. But I want to thank you both very much for being my guests today. It's been a fascinating interview, and it's been lovely to meet you.
Likewise.
You too. Thank you for interviewing us.
Being interested in the book.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Good Grief. To hear more about my personal story, please pick up a copy of my book, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival, available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible via Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online book retailers.